Welcome to the Blind Zone, where curiosity brings its own reward. And what am I curious about today? Well, I was curious about a statement a friend made to me that said that it was a different God in the Old Testament as opposed to the New Testament. And I thought long and hard about that. So today I'm going to be talking about dispensations and what a dispensation is. And it's going to prove the faithfulness of God, that He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, and that he does what he does with a specific strategy in mind. So let me explain to you what a dispensation is, and then I'll go through 7 of them in the Bible, and I give you examples of why they are what they are. Dispensation in the Bible is a specific segment in time in which there's 4 things that have to happen. First off, God has to tell the people what to do. The second thing is the people have to understand what he told them and then rebel. The third thing is that God has to bring judgment on them to try and straighten up their behavior. And the fourth one is where God steps past it and we move on to a different way of dealing with the people. Now, when he steps past it, it's not a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We're just going to forgive these people. That's how people are. God has said, this is not working. I'm going to need to change or raise the stakes until these people come around to recognizing that it is in their best interest to follow God. Now, the first dispensation is the dispensation of innocence, and that's Adam in the garden. So it's Adam in the garden is perfect. God told him, do not eat from the fruit, the tree of eat the tree of knowledge, good and evil. And Adam and his wife were like, oh, that looks really tasty. And they ate it. So the judgment for Adam was where he and his wife were kicked out of the garden and they were banned, because if they ever ate of the tree of life, then they would have been sustained in that life form with the sinful behavior. So the age of the dispensation of innocence is the very beginning with Adam. So again, God told him what to do. Adam rebelled. God judged. Then he stepped past it. And the next dispensation is the dispensation of conscience. And that's from the fall of Adam through the time of Noah. And again, God wanted the people to acknowledge who he was and that God was going to be the God of their lives. And they said, no, we're not doing that. So God had to judge them, and he saved a small remnant of people in the form of Noah and his wife, their 3 sons and their 3 wives, put them on a boat, and they all floated around for a while until the flood had ended. And then that's the end of that dispensation. But unfortunately, when the water receded and Noah and his family all came out, the problem that started it continued, because in their heart they were still sinful because of Adam's original sin. So that was the sin of consciousness. The next the next dispensation is that of governance. And this one goes from the flood of Noah to the Tower of Babel. After they got off the ark and they repopulated the area, God said very specifically, go into all the world. Don't stay here. Go and populate. I'm going to give it all to you. You have food and animals. You had all kinds of things. And they thought about it and said, you know what? We're good here. But they weren't good there so that they were good for God. They were good there because they had figured out things to do in their own heads. So God looked down and he saw that if these people could construct a tower, which they had done, and they could work together, then they would be able to do a lot more damage. So he came down and confused their language, and that was their judgment. He told them to scatter. They said no. He confused their language, and they did ultimately scatter, and he stepped past it. So the next one is the patriarchal dispensation, and that's when Abraham comes into play in Genesis 12. And God says, that's it. I'm going to make a new nation just for myself, and I'm going to make you a great nation. And through this, you will be given land, seed, and you will be a blessing. But during the course of the time, And in fact, in the book of Genesis, God says very clearly to Abraham, your people are not going to do well with this. I want this as a dispensation. I want you to know that I want this to go well, but it's not. And so, as your judgment and punishment, you're going to be enslaved for 400 years, which is what happens. That's the time of the quiet between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus. That's the 400 years that the Israelites were enslaved because of their own disobedience. So God told the people what to do. They said, no way. He judged them. And so then the next dispensation starts with Moses, and it's the Mosaic dispensation. This one goes from um, the the time of Exodus all the way through the the temple, the upper room discourse, pardon me. So it's from Moses all the way to the upper room discourse. Now you're saying, now wait a minute, there's lots of stuff that happened. If you broke all that down, it wouldn't even, because they're all the same disobediences. And this is another way I know that it's the same God, because in Exodus and Leviticus, he used priests and Levites to tell the people how to act. They did that for a very short amount of time. And then God switched to using prophets and judges. And then he went to kings. And then that whole system finally went belly up, and he put them all into captivity. So that's what happens up until the time of the upper room when Jesus comes on the scene, and that's the next dispensation. That's the new covenant. The new dispensation is Jesus coming and saving the people from themselves, and he was from the beginning what God had planned all along. He wanted to do it another way. He wanted them to just be obedient because they could know and trust and love God, but he knew ultimately he would have to send his son to save us from our own selves. So that's it. That's the dispensation. So when you think about when somebody tells you that the God of the Old Testament is way meaner than the God in the New Testament, it's not that he's mean at all. He just wants the people, he wants the best for his people. And like any parent who knows, if you don't discipline your child, then they won't understand what the correct behavior it is you want from them. So that's it. I hope that was helpful. And when now you have a way to, argue against the mean God and the nicer God of the New Testament, because they're all one and the same. He had a plan, he had a purpose, and he had to do whatever means necessary to call them people to himself so that they too would understand him in a way that would shape history. So that's it. We'll see you next week on The Blind Zone.